And welcome to another video. And today it is the 14th of December, and today we will be just doing an update about the Battle of Bakhmut and talking about the recent updates from this sector of the fighting. And I also want to get into some of the news related to different Russian and Ukrainian stockpiles, casualties, all of that. So we're going to start off by just giving a bit of a summary of what's been going on in the past few days, starting with some of the troop rotations in this area due to some of the heavy casualties, especially on the Ukrainian side, where we have some more open source information. And so we've seen in recent days that units such as the 54th Brigade have been rotating their forces in this area. So a lot of people they have been mistaking this for a withdrawal, but this is not the same thing. A troop rotation is different than a withdrawal because they're just being sent to the rear for a little bit just to get reinforcements or to get, whether it be like medical assistance or better equipment, whatever it may be. And so they're probably going to be sent to the front line at some point again. You can see that Kostiantynivka is really one of these cities where a lot of these troops are being sent to for the troop rotation. And it's not the only city that's being used for this. Also on the rear, you have this town, Chasiv Yar, which is very important to the logistical situation in Bakhmut. You can see that there are a few roads that lead from Chasiv Yar to Bakhmut, and a lot of the different units that are fighting on the front line, they have some of their rear bases, some of their, whether it be artillery systems or air defense systems set up in Chasiv Yar. You can see that the roads lead towards Bakhmut from Chasiv Yar, and so that is also important to note. You're getting a lot of reinforcements from the 57th Brigade specifically. I'm going to see if I can find the 57th Brigade over here, because I know I have a lot of units, and I want to just make sure that everyone gets to see its location on the map. So here we have the 57th Motorized Brigade. I had it on the rear around Pokrovsk, which is sort of this junction in between the front next to the Donetsk city and the one in Bakhmut. But it's safe to say that a lot of the units from the 57th Brigade are fighting in Bakhmut right now, and that a lot of recent conscripts have been integrated into this unit and are being sent quickly to the front line to reinforce the garrison over there, which again implies that the Ukrainians are not planning to withdraw and that they're still fighting tooth and nail to keep the city, or at least partially keep the city under its control. And I'm going to get more into that later on. Also, we're getting news of reinforcements from the 128th Brigade. I've talked about this unit ad nauseum ever since the battles in Kherson, where the 128th Mountain Assault Brigade was really an integral part of Ukraine's operation to take over the different cities that are to the west of the Dnipro River. So they fought on the bridgehead on the east of the Inhulets River, Andrivka, Lozove, if you remember. They were a big part of those battles. They fought in areas like Dudchany, Milove, and then they actually ended up reaching Berislav. And so they were not active in fighting for about a month, let's say, ever since Kherson was taken by the Ukrainians. And now they have been rotated to this part of the front line. It was mentioned by Russian sources that they were located around Parasokivka. You can see that this town, Parasokivka, is sort of connecting to all of these other towns to the north of Bakhmut, so it is pretty important. It also connects to Soledar, Krasnohora, and a lot of these other key towns, and there is I think it is a rail hub over here in Parasokivka, so you can see that it is in a strategically significant position. Okay, let's move on now. We also have news about the 77th Air Mobile Brigade. I might have talked about it before, but I don't have this unit on the map, so I just added it in today before recording this video. I still have this unit stationed in Zhytomyr, which is where all of the new air mobile brigades, all of these like air assault units that are not a part of the ground forces of Ukraine are located, because there is a airstrip in Zhytomyr where they get trained. Specifically, they get trained by UK specialists, and I think that they finished their basic training in late October, and ever since they've just been preparing to go into battle. And so now apparently they're being sent into the Battle of Bakhmut. And so this is a new unit, NATO trained 77th Air Mobile Assault Brigade This is one of several air mobile assault brigades that has been formed since the beginning of this war. And so a lot of these units are now being sent pretty quickly to the front line. We'll see if the logistical situation sort of hampers their ability to reach the front line in due time, though. Let's move on now to the actual news regarding the front lines. Okay, so in recent days, the Russians have been taking advantage of their positions in these quarries, in these trenches, to expand their domain of control into the residential areas. And so we know that they had control over this quarry over here. I've talked about it before. We know that they had control over some of these warehouses and some of these areas in the industrial zone, such as the furniture factory and other such dachas or factories in the eastern part of Patrice Lumumba Street. And so using these positions, they were able to go on the offensive and overrun the positions of the 71st Jaeger Brigade and actually reach some of the residential areas. So let's zoom in for a second over here to see what's going on. So they were able to advance on this road over here called, I think it's called Prvomajsky Lane, and they were able to reach an important intersection which leads into several different roads that are inlets into different residential blocks over here. So you have, for instance, Fedora Maximevka Street. This is one of the main streets on the outskirts of Bakhmut. Then you have Vatutina Lane. This one leads to some of the stores in the Bakhmut city center. And so Russia was able to take control of the intersection to these streets and then took control of another intersection, which leads into this other part of Pershetravneve road. They were able to take over a gas station and just solidify control over some of these blocks and houses over here, which is important just to get a foothold before going in to some of these other blocks. So in this area, as I said before, you have the 71st Jaeger Brigade, but you also have the 93rd Mechanized Brigade. They've had some troop rotations recently, but they do still have some units centered in this area, and they are one of the more battle-hardened units with more experience and considered one of the best units in the armed forces of Ukraine. So this entire area where Russia has been able to break through is called the Zabakhmutivka district. You can see that it is to the east of the Bakhmutovka River, and that it is just to the west of the industrial area. And so it's in a very interesting position where it is relatively low elevation, where a lot of the crossings have been destroyed across the Bakhmutovka River, which makes resupply with large armored vehicles very difficult. And so it seems as if Ukraine is expecting to eventually lose their positions over here, but they are nonetheless trying to hold on because we have seen very fierce urban battles over here. This is something that is corroborated by both Russian and Ukrainian sources. And so moving on from that, we also have some news from a bit further to the south about heavy fighting again on Fedora Maximivka Lane, which is this road over here. It connects to the garbage dump into some of the other industrial sites, you could say. So you do have the garbage dump over here and the factory nearby. So we did get footage from the Wagner Group posted that showed that it was under their control, but it seems like it has changed hands again. We know this because according to Rybar, this garbage dump is now contested by the Ukrainians again. And so it seems like they were able to conduct a localized counterattack to retake the garbage dump, which was taken before by the Russians. And remember, I made a video on this garbage dump, and I said how it is located in actually a pretty important area because it could be used as a spearhead to enter the Zabakhmutivka district. So Ukraine probably noticed this, and they were able to retake their fort positions in this area to prevent a big breakthrough in this region. Now, we have gotten a lot of news from the industrial zone of Bakhmut as well, where, as I said before, the dividing line was really around here, where the auto repair shop was under Russian control, but the Sinyats construction plant was still under Ukrainian control. The reason why this area is so important is because Ukraine has been fortifying it for a while, and they have been using those factories as forward positions to hold back the Russian assaults, and they have been very successful at that over the past 3-4 months. But nonetheless, they have now had to withdraw across, I don't know if this is connected to the Bakhmutovka River, but some other body of water, might be a pond. So they've now withdrawn to the west and given up control of the entire Bakhmut industrial district. So that includes the construction plant, the customs office, the minor hotel, and the art winery factory over here. So now you have the Wagner Group finally in control of some parts of Bakhmut that are relatively close to the Bakhmutovka River. So now you're going to see them fighting very close to these residential areas, perhaps trying to reach the crossings. But again, as I've said before, the main goal of the Wagner Group and of the Russians in general is not to just head-on launch assaults into the city itself because of how fortified it is, because of how dense it is, because of how many fighters for the Ukrainians there are. It's not a good idea, and we've seen it fail once they attacked the industrial district many times and were pushed back. Now they've been successful, but this is after attacking the flanks for so long that really Ukraine has been forced to divide their forces, whether it be sending some units to Pithorodne, like the 71st Jaeger Brigade. As I said before, they have some units stationed in the Bakhmutivka district, which is the one that I was just talking about over here. They also have some in Pithorodny. So they've had to disperse their forces around several parts of the front line, and this is obviously very inefficient, and it's part of the reason why Russia was able to advance now in an area where they had not been able to make any gains for many, many months. And so this is a part of their overall strategy, just to chip away at Ukrainian land and mold the battlefield in a way that suits their goals of basically making a cauldron in Bakhmut. And so we've seen them try to continue this strategy by continually assaulting Pithorodne, assaulting Soledar as well. It's been reported from Russian sources that they've been able to take over several outposts on the outskirts of Pithorodne. There was no really specific area mentioned, which is why I can't confirm this. But we have seen the Wagner Group actually enter some of these residential areas in the northeastern part of Bakhmut, very close to this gas station where they had a position set up. And so, again, you could see an advance by the Russians to this area over here because you see there aren't that many residential blocks over here before reaching this open field and then reaching the Bakhmutovka River in an area where it is very narrow and then actually reaching the main road supplying Bakhmut. You are also seeing a lot of clashes from the Ukrainians and Russians in this forested area over here. There were some videos from foreign fighters. I think you have the Mozart group operating in this area. They are fighting against the Wagner Group, ironically, and so you're seeing a lot of clashes in this specific sector. There are a lot of other forested areas where there's fighting. This is one of the main ones, where if Russia is able to get control of this forested area, then they will be able to advance towards the Bakhmutovka River as well from here and just totally cause the Ukrainian lines to be in disarray, because really this is holding back the Russians from advancing and taking over all of eastern Bakhmut. Now we're seeing a lot of videos from the Bakhmut city center itself. In some of the hotels you have Ukrainian barracks set up, and so those have been fired upon very heavily. You see Hotel Bakhmut over here, Hotel Atlantic, Hotel Transit. So a lot of these different hotels, they're being used as bases right now by the Ukrainians. You see in these videos that there are anti-tank obstacles set up on the roads to prevent some sort of breakthrough by the Russians. And so we've seen additionally in the northern part of Bakhmut and some of these bridges that are supposed to be supplying Bakhmut, we've seen them get destroyed. Now, there's been a debate as to whether it was Russian saboteurs or Ukrainian sappers that were responsible for this. But now we know that it was not just the rail bridge that was destroyed, but it was also the road that was destroyed as well. So this is pretty interesting. I've seen Russian sources say that it was their fault, like they were the ones that did it, that it was Russian saboteurs, but I've also seen them say that it was Ukrainians that were preparing to retreat. I have no way of knowing, but we could nonetheless just admit to the fact that they have been destroyed. We also have another bridge over here that this was damaged by saboteurs. And so this, again, makes it very difficult for Ukraine to basically replenish resources using their heavy equipment. But it also slows down any sort of Russian advance that could have occurred in this area. And so we have to take into account both sides of that. Now, let's move on to Opitny and to the southern part of Bakhmut for a second. So in Opitny, I've seen some Russian sources report that about 90% of the suburb is under their control. I can't confirm this, but I can confirm that there have been heavy clashes over here. This is something that the Ukrainian armed forces have mentioned. Because basically every day they give a list of different towns that they've repelled assaults on. One of them is actually Kurdyumivka, which I think is pretty interesting that they're still claiming that Kurdyumivka is under their control. So of course they also mentioned Opitny, which again means that there is fighting in this region. I've seen maps from Rybar, or even from the Wagner Group itself, showing that it is under this town is contested. And in recent days, you've seen the Wagner Group advance, taking over some key areas such as this gas station. This school is right now contested by both sides. You see these two units over here. These are from the 53rd Brigade. I should move these because these are Ukrainian units. You have the 53rd Brigade, and specifically the 2nd Mechanized Battalion, and the 1st Mechanized Battalion is also operating in this region. And so, again, the problem with Opitny is that if it finally falls to the Russians, then they do have a spearhead into the center of Bakhmut. They can reach the Bakhmut Dam over here, and they can also go to the west and attack the Ukrainian rear, take over some of these open areas, and really just get control of, for instance, this park area, the cemetery, and make a Ukrainian advance or a Ukrainian retreat very difficult, because they could reach the road over here and cut it off, and you'd have a pincer maneuver. Of course, you also have the pincer maneuver that would occur from Klishchivka, but we've seen Russia it's been very difficult for Russia to take Klishchivka. They've been attacking it, and they haven't been able to enter the town yet. Ukraine is fortifying it very heavily, but we have seen the Russians gain some ground to the northeast of Klishchivka, taking over some key positions. There are some trenches in this area that were set up by Ukraine, so those are being cleared out first before taking Klishchivka. You see there are a few dachas, I think, over here that need to be cleared out by Russia first, and then they could probably launch an assault onto the southern parts of Bakhmut and towards some of these forested areas to the north of Klishchivka, just to further isolate Klishchivka. Even if Klishchivka ends up falling, though, there are some other Ukrainian fortifications in this region just to the north of Klishchivka. You can see how extensive these trenches are, and these are only the ones from Google Maps, and so there's probably many more that were dug up in recent months, so you can see how fortified this area is. So all of these trenches need to be cleared by Russia, and then they could finally advance onto Ivanivske. Okay, let's move on to the situation a bit further south. So again, fighting in the area of Kurdyumivka reported by the Ukrainians. I still have it as under full Russian control, but of course you could have some back and forth fighting near the town. It was reported by Russian sources that the 28th Brigade destroyed or just mined some positions along the Donetsk Dam over here. So I'm not exactly sure what that means. Perhaps there was some sort of pontoon bridge or some sort of control center responsible for operating the dam that was destroyed by the Ukrainians, and that was just done in an effort to slow down the Russian advance across the dam, because we know that they already have some positions that are along these ridges to the west of the dam. So I don't exactly know what's going on over here, but it seems as if the situation has been sort of static ever since the Russians crossed over here. It's not that wide of a dam, and so it's not very difficult to cross over, but it is still nonetheless a natural barrier that Ukraine is utilizing to their advantage. You have the 28th Mechanized Brigade in this area. They fought in Kherson, and now they've been moved into the front line over here. Now, I want to talk one last time about the situation with artillery, where we've heard from both Russian and Ukrainian sources that Russia has about a 10-to-1 artillery advantage in this sector of fighting specifically. And so really the issue is that Russia has been overwhelming the Ukrainians with artillery, and this is really one of the main reasons why they have been forced to withdraw from some of their forward positions. So let me give you an example. There is the 25th Brigade, which has been fighting on the front lines for really a long time in Bakhmut, and they recently released a video complaining about their unit having about 70% casualties, and they're complaining about just totally being bombarded by the Russians, not having proper cover from these shelling attacks. And for that reason, they said that they were forced to withdraw from their fort positions. And so this is part of the reason why Ukraine has not been able to hold on. And in areas where they have been able to hold on, they have been suffering very extensive casualties. It's not to say that Russia hasn't suffered casualties either. They have been sending waves of Wagner fighters, and certainly a lot of them have died in the process, especially from some Ukrainian drones. I also have to say that the 54th Mechanized Brigade from the Ukrainian side, they have some very strong artillery, and some of their artillery units have been hitting the Russians pretty hard in their fortified positions. But again, there is a 10-1 imbalance, so inevitably the Ukrainians will suffer more casualties in this regard. So I want to get to this very interesting article from the Financial Times, which is talking about how the Ukrainians are running out of their stockpiles of artillery shells and also of air defense missiles. And this is sort of important to Bakhmut because of the situation with artillery, but also because of the recent Russian airstrikes on energy systems and on military infrastructure in Ukraine itself. And so we've seen in recent days that due to the shortage of Ukrainian Soviet air defense systems like the S-300s and the Buk systems, these are the ones that have been used by Ukraine really since the beginning of the war, and they have had some effect in preventing as much devastation as possible to Ukraine. So they've been able to at least stop, to a certain extent, the Russian missile bombardments on the Ukrainian rear. Now those stockpiles are running out because Ukraine has been really expending a huge amount of missiles, a huge amount of shells in defending its territory. And so now the Biden administration is expected to send Patriot air defense systems to Ukraine. Now the logistics of all of that happening, that could take really a long time. And so in the short term, that's not really going to do anything. And really the situation in Bakhmut could deteriorate by the time that Patriot missile systems are sent there. So really this is more to do with like defending energy systems in Kiev, for instance, not really with Bakhmut itself. Now, we're also seeing a lot of arms deals with Germany, Spain, Slovakia, different NATO countries that are trying to send in their air defense systems or different sort of artillery systems. So, for instance, the Germans, they've in recent months sent a lot of their Iris-Ts and some of their Jeopard anti-air guns. And so these are really mobile. They can move around a lot. And so these might be used by some of the units that are closer to the front lines. And, of course, you also have the MIM-23 Hawk, which is the predecessor to the Patriot air defense system. I think Spain, in the article, it said that they sent 6 of those to Ukraine. And so, again, we're seeing this shift by the Ukrainians from their old Soviet-style air defense systems to the new NATO ones. And so it's going to be their task now is going to have to be to integrate that into their current arsenal in an efficient manner to deal with the threat from Russia. And so that's all I have to say for today. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys later.